starts now. My brother and I affirm our first contention is peace in Yemen. In 2015, Saudi Arabia spearheaded a brutal military intervention into Yemen, causing a humanitarian catastrophe. Basha of the HRW 20 explains that Saudi Arabia has committed to a total war strategy in Yemen, intentionally blocking food and medicine to desperate Yemenis and indiscriminately attacking the people. While Saudi Arabia should be stepping up to the negotiating table, Thrall of the Cato Institute finds that U.S. military presence has emboldened Saudi hawks to continue pressing for a military approach. Ending the U.S. military presence in the region would save Yemen for two reasons. First, by forcing Saudi Arabia to go defensive. Because Saudi Arabia relies on the U.S. for its defense, it allows them to focus on their offense in Yemen. Thus, Spandau of the Cato Institute writes that a U.S. pullout would force the royals to pull back their forces to provide for their own security, ending the capacity to aggress in Yemen. Second is by forcing Saudi Arabia to the negotiating table. Parsi of Foreign Policy finds that when Trump threatened to withdraw troops from the region, Saudi Arabia turned towards talks. After these talks, airstrikes decreased by 80%, and there was not a single Yemeni death. However, this wasn't enough to create long-lasting peace. Ignatius 19 concludes that once the U.S. removes its presence, Saudi Arabia will realize the appeal of peace. And in the Yemen crisis is our foremost priority, as the UN finds that every year it goes on, millions more innocent civilians are on the brink of death. Our second contention is saving Iraq. UCLA 20 explains that the assassination of Iranian General Soleimani by U.S. military forces has created a tinderbox situation that could easily erupt into war between the U.S. and Iran. Malley of Foreign Policy contextualizes that there has been a steady stream of incidents in Iraq from January to just days ago. Fisher of the NYT explains that each cycle of tit-for-tat escalation has, rather than forcing the other side to back down, led the other to ramp up. UCLA concludes that with no endgame in sight, the US and Iran are headed for military conflict. This can happen in three ways. First is a US miscalculation. The Washington Post confirms that the current political situation in the US is the perfect storm for miscalculation. UCLA contextualizes that the US strategy of maximum pressure has become a self-fulfilling prophecy in which the US government is convinced that Iran is an imminent threat to its troops in Iraq and can only be defeated through military force. For this reason, Farda 20 finds that the Pentagon has issued a confidential order planning an operation against Iran-backed militias in Iraq within the next few weeks. Second is an Iranian diversion. Iran is desperate for a political victory. Byman of Vox 20 finds that protests in Iran have swept more than 100 cities, descending the country into chaos. However, recent U.S. military pressure has enabled Iran to portray the U.S. as the aggressor, creating a timely diversion for Iran and feeding the narrative that the U.S. aggression, rather than the Iranian regime's own abuses, is the cause of their woes. Compass to the JTA concludes that the regime under siege from all sides and with no diplomatic exit ramp will calculate a confrontation with the U.S. would be a good distraction. Third is Iranian-backed Iraqi militias. Memory 20 finds that on April 4th, national resistance factions in Iraq issued a statement declaring American forces as occupation forces. Fulton of Vice 19 continues that these militias don't accept any violation of Iraqi sovereignty and therefore stated that as long as the Americans are still here, it's impossible to put down our weapons. Memory continues that these pro-Iranian militias want the U.S. to take uncalculated military action because U.S. resources are stretched thin internally, and it would expose the U.S. to local criticism, which would shore up U.S. support for U.S. removal. Ultimately, a U.S.-Iran war would be devastating. Gabbard confirms that a U.S.-Iran war in Iraq would make the previous Iraq war look like a cakewalk, killing millions and fracturing the entire region into chaos. By contrast, if the U.S. withdrew its military presence, the U.S. and Iran could reach a diplomatic solution. Compass continues that Iran's economic vulnerability serves as a diplomatic opportunity that they are willing to take a diplomatic exit ramp. However, UCLA 20 explains that as long as the U.S. military presence remains in the region, Iran would see such an agreement as a capitulation to the U.S. Doss Malik concludes that if the U.S. fails to capitalize on this moment to de-escalate tensions, they will not only miss the window of opportunity for peace, but will start a war. Thus we affirm.
All right.
Yeah, we're good. Actually, a minute. Could I see the when Trump threatened withdrawal, we saw an 8% decrease in airstrikes, specifically the part where it says when he threatened withdrawal.
All right, we just sent it. Let us know when you get it.
All right, well, you know.
All right, we just got it. We'll start prep right now. That's 6 seconds.
All right. Everyone's ready? Yep. Okay. We can start time now. We negate our sole contention as Iraq. Affirming destabilizes Iraq in 2 ways. Subpoint A is terror. Do 19 writes that in the last 3 years, America's counter-terror efforts in Iraq have forced the Islamic State out of almost all of its territorial conquest and liberated 12 million people. The fate, however, is not over. As Giglio 20 explains, ISIS has transitioned into a disaggregated network of sleeper cells with the capability for resurgence. Affirming creates terror in 2 ways. The first is ending counter-terror efforts. Heller 20 explains, in the case of American withdrawal, Iraqi forces would be left on their own as any multilateral coalition efforts would quickly dissolve. This would be disastrous, as Monitor 20 writes, despite years of U.S. training, Iraqi anti-terror forces are still far from self-sufficient, as their target exploitation capability is currently, quote, non-existent. And Cohen 20 finds that the only way to curb ISIS's recent unconventional tactics is a non-remote U.S. military presence in the region. Overall, Heller concludes that the exit of coalition forces is the most direct way to relieve pressure on ISIS remnants and allow them to quantitatively escalate their insurgency and expand both numerically and geographically. Second is PMF militias. Smith 20 explains there is current widespread support for reducing the Iran-backed PMF militia grip on power within Iraq. Problematically, Heller 20 finds that in the absence of U.S. troops, these Shia militias would take on a significantly greater role in Iraq's security forces, placing them at the forefront of the Iraqi counter-terror effort. Not only are these militias ill-equipped to prepare to combat ISIS, Heller concludes that they will resort to blunt, non-discriminate means in mostly Sunni areas, reopening deep societal rifts. Bahagi 17 confirms before sidelined in the fight against ISIS, PMF militias conducted sectarian violence that spurred jihadist movements. For this reason, Hansen 28 concludes that if the militias become too strong, we will likely see a, quote, even worse ISIS in the future. The impact is humanitarian crisis. The Associated Press finds that in just 6 months of ISIS resurgence in 2014, 5,000 Iraqis were killed and 1.2 million were internationally displaced. Goldenberg 20 concludes that if ISIS were to return to some parts of the country today, and America's absence, the humanitarian effect would be devastating, as thousands of Iraqis would fall under oppressive terrorist rule. Subpoint B is Iran. Hussein 20 finds that even amid a major public health crisis, Iran shows no signs of relenting on their primary strategic goal of driving the U.S. out of Iraq and securing Iraq as a political proxy and economic lifeline. Fortunately, Iraq has not yet turned, as Smith 20 explains, despite Iran's best efforts to coerce the Iraqi parliament into expelling U.S. troops, massive pro-American boycotts prevented this action. Affirming, however, cements Iraq as an Iranian asset, as Jihad 20 finds America's withdrawal will leave Iran as the most influential player in Iraqi politics and security, and Erickson 18 confirms after the last U.S. withdrawal from Iraq, the Iranians immediately provided government support, arms, and training that consolidated their political power in the region. Salvin 20 concludes, in this scenario, Iraq would inevitably defer to its more powerful neighbor over a fickle superpower in the West. Plov 20 concludes this would end the U.S.-Iraq relationships entirely, as no U.S. politician of any party would continue to invest time, money, or resources into a government that has sided with an adversary. There are 2 impacts. The first is U.S. sanctions. Jeremiah 20 explains the Trump administration views Iraq as a medium by which they can squeeze the Iranian economy. Unfortunately, Jihad 20 concludes if the United States no longer has assets to protect in Iraq, Trump and his hawks will likely view Iraq as an arena by which to combat Iran, thus implementing sanctions, thereby avoiding direct confrontation and maintaining the maximum pressure security strategy and losing no American life. Sanctions would be fatal, as Al-Armari 20 indicates that the last time sanctions were imposed in Iraq, 227,000 children died of malnutrition. The second impact is civil war. Al-Abidi 20 explains U.S. withdrawal will embolden Shia localists in Iraq as Iran gains greater political power and influence, further alienating the already marginalized Sunni community from the Iraqi government. This would spark widespread sectarian conflict, as Paul 6 explains that the last time a political vacuum in Iraq was filled by Shiites, Sunni Arabs revolted against the onslaught of the perceptually oppressive rule, sparking debilitating nationwide civil conflict. This would be fatal, as BBC 19 finds the Iraqi civil conflict of 2013 killed 460,000 people. Thus, we negate.
Can we just see the last impact evidence you read on the Civil War?
Yeah.
Like any evidence that you read on the Civil War impact?
All of it?
How
Or
many
just-
cards? You read like 2 or 3 cards.
There's 3 cards.
Can we see 3? All 3?
Yeah.
While we're grabbing that, do you think you could get the evidence from your first link on C1 that says like specifically because they won't have defense, they'll be forced to pull back?
Yeah. That's been down.
All right, I sent those cards.
Okay, I got them. I'm gonna start prep while reading them, and then my brother's gonna give you guys the other card. Starting now. That was 15 seconds. And the other card is getting sent right now. All right, sent.
All right, we'll let you know when we get it.
All right, we'll start prep right now. So we're at 24 total.
Are you ready for cross?
Okay.
You know the person.
Okay. So time starts. So would you agree that whoever accesses conflict controls the internal link into terrorism?
No.
Why? Conflict increases terrorism, doesn't it?
Sure, but there's also just terrorism in general that's going to happen.
Right,
Like,
but
no matter.
if conflict arises,
Yeah,
terrorism increases, doesn't it?
The thing is though, terrorism also causes conflict. It can go both ways. So I don't want to establish that this early.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. Okay, so what would a US-Iran war look like?
Okay, so that's literally what we're. You want me to reread the case?
No, not how it would happen. What it would look like. Like where would
It's history. It's right, like we say, it's a tit for tat escalation in the status quo, where
Yeah.
the U.S. would strike Iran, Iran would strike the United States with this diversionary conflict, or there's the Iraqi militias that the U.S. would strike who would try.
Yeah, but what is like the final conflict? Because you impact out to just like a US-Iran war, like a full
I mean,
war.
a U.S.-Iran war would be devastating. It's two superpowers.
I mean, yeah, but what would it actually
It
look
would
like?
destroy Iraq. It would absolutely destroy Iraq.
Is Iran gonna like send troops to the US?
I mean, no, they're not going to send troops to the U.S. The fighting happens in Iraq.
Then where is the conflict just occurring like in Iraq?
Right. And then it spans the Middle East. That's all
So
right.
it's like proxy conflicts in the region.
No, it's between the U.S. and Iran in Iraq. It's a regional conflict.
Like US troops will go into Iraq and then fight.
Right. Yeah. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about Iran. So when the U.S. pulled out in 2011, what happened?
All right, when the U.S. pulled out in 2011, we say that they ended up being more aggressive because the United States was no longer in the region.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so they ended up consolidating more political power in the region by going into Iraq and sort of saying like, here's this, here's that. I think you're gonna like this. The United States was no longer there to stop them.
So here's the issue with that. Iran and Iraq are currently friends. Their governments both support each other.
Yeah,
so
but
so let me actually read what the card you sent. You read impact evidence, and the card says about 500,000 people died in Iraq as a result of a war-related causes between the U.S.-led invasion in 2003 and mid-2011. The U.S. pulled out after that.
Yeah, okay. That's just the conflict. What are impact? Okay, wait. Can I explain our impact scenario?
Go ahead.
So basically what happens is that Iran is going to take over Iraq because they see them as like a political asset. The problem is Iran is majorly Shia, and so the small marginalized Sunni community that is currently in Iraq is going to feel oppressed again, like our evidence says, like what happened, which like sparked more like revolutions and conflicts against them. So that's what we say. It's the conflict between like the Sunni and the Shia that's going to end.
The civil war you cite occurred in 2006 when the U.S. was still there.
Yeah, those
point is, in 2011,
impacts.
in
those
2011,
are just on what could happen.
Can I just ask? In 2011, if we buy your link story, why didn't the civil war occur?
Okay, because we pulled out. It happened like 2 years earlier. Later, sorry.
Wait, no, the 2013 card does not say that the Civil War happened in 2013. The 2013 card is from 2013 and talks about from 2003.
That is literally just the quantification of the last time that major like conflict has erupted between the Sunni and the Shia groups in the region. All we're accessing is the conflict that erupts from there.
We'll run prep starting now.
Okay, that was 45 seconds. I'm going to start off with 2 overviews on their case, then just going down their case. Is everybody ready? Okay, my time starts now. Starting off with an overview on a power balance. A power balance has allowed superpowers in the Middle East to coexist for centuries despite being ideologically opposed pre-US intervention. However, the US has ruptured the power balance, giving Saudi Arabia an upper hand. The result is an stability-instability paradox where one side feels the need to be aggressive and build up their military to reestablish mutually assured destruction, while the other side becomes more aggressive because of the superior security guarantee. Luckily, absent the US laser, the Cato Institute finds that the chance that a regional hegemon will emerge in the Persian Gulf during the next 20 years is slim to none. The only 3 major potential powers are Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia, and they don't possess the capabilities necessary to conquer neighboring territories. Thus, US withdrawal would push the region into a state of defense dominance. That's really critical because the status quo is trending towards war. ICG finds that there are 10 flashpoints for conflict. Creating a power balance uniquely prevents these deadly wars from breaking out. The second overview is about shifting to peace. According to Holden 18, the massive military expenditure from the US increases the tendency to seek military solutions to non-military problems. It's happened in Latin America. It is now going on in the Middle East. Due to our military presence, the US devotes 1,004% more to projecting military power than on building alliances. Crucially, Johnson 18 finds that a small US presence would force us to focus more on regional security cooperation and alliance building, shifting our strategy away from wars. If we devoted a tiny fraction of our military spending to support multilateral peacekeeping, the international community would have a robust capability to enforce peace in the Middle East. That said, let's go into their contention. Starting on their sole contention about Iraq. Their subpoint A is talking about terror. The argument is that the US leaving allows ISIS to resurge. But first of all, you can turn it because Dan of the Nation, Goper of Army, finds that over the last 15 years, 80% of terror attacks can be attributed to the United States. The United States presence increases terrorism for 2 reasons. First, the boomerang effect, because Hartung finds that the terrorists can steal US weapons. But second of all, the Bowman of Berkeley finds that US presence is the biggest catalyst for anti-Americanism and radicalization. But Pott quantifies that overall US military assistance increases terrorist survival by 67%. This outweighs our argument on time frame because the war on terror becomes an infinite loop as our intervention to stop terrorism only leads to more terrorist groups, resulting in an endless cycle of war. The second response is that a small US presence does the job just as well. Thomas 20 finds that US can use a comparatively small number of troops, can focus on A, enabling in logistics, States, and B, investing in local governments and providing aid on the ground, this strategy was actually effective, and it was actually a reliance on Syrian Kurds and internal forces to fight off ISIS that was successful. We don't need a big military presence. And third of all, OCOs can do the trick. VAVA finds that Operation Glowing Symphony and OCO destroy the online recruiting system and ISIS's financial capacity to expand. On the second argument about PF militias, there's a big turn, and that comes from Hello, their own card, which says that American unilateral military bombings of Iraqi paramilitaries polarize Iraqi politics and increase support for Iraqi forces. Further, U.S. military action allows Iraqi PMFs to consolidate power in the country to the point of forcing the U.S. out of Iraq. A, there's a couple of implications. A, this turns their argument because it indicates that U.S. action to strengthen PMFs in the country by mobilizing support. B, this terminally non-uniques their argument because U.S. forces are forced out of the region, so we'd say it's better to leave on our own terms peacefully. But C, it turns their subpoint about Iraqi civil war because American actions dramatically polarize the country along sectarian divides, which is, again, their internal link to civil war. Now let's go to their subpoint B, which is talking about Iran. First of all, their evidence doesn't make any sense because what does aggression mean? Iran hasn't actually started wars in Iraq in the absence of the U.S. In fact, national interest finds that Iraq and Iran experiencing the most friendly relationship that has ever existed currently right now. Iran doesn't want to fracture that relationship because, like they say, Iran fears that another invasion from a hostile Iraqi government could happen. So they have a vested interest in protecting. On their impact about U.S. Now let's go to the impact level. On their impact about sanctions, the link evidence simply says when the so first of all, we would say that you can turn it because this year Iraqi government voted to expel U.S. troops from the region. So not withdrawing on our own records means that Iraqi militias will continue to attack the U.S., which gives the U.S. a greater incentive to sanction Iraq. If we withdraw on our own accords, this is not going to happen. On their impact too, their evidence is the timeline's really bad because the civil war happened in 2006. The U.S. left in 2011, but their evidence is from 2006, and it's talking about de-Ba'athification, which has nothing to do with the United States. Don't let them come up here and tell you the civil war impact is true. It's not even related to the evidence they read.
I need two pieces of evidence.
Yeah.
The first one was, wait, what? Why is there an echo?
It's there.
Oh, the first one is the first piece of evidence on the second overview. And then the second one is the, wait, just to be sure, after, so you on sub A on terror, you went 80% is attributed the 2 warrants. And then what, the thing about survival, what was that response?
Oh, the pot that U.S. military assistance increases to terrorist survival by 67%.
Yeah, could I see that one?
Yeah. Okay, it's been sent.
All right, we'll let you know when we get it.
All right, we got it. We'll start prep right now. That was 15 seconds, which puts us at, where were we at before? 18?
No, we're like.
Oh, wait. I'm sorry, what prep did you have us before these 14 seconds?
30.
We did 30.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
all right, perfect. Then we're at, yeah, we're at 45.
Yeah.
And then we're actually gonna run a little bit more starting right now. So it's going to be our case, their case. Actually, we're going to run a little bit. Wait, we're at 56. We're going to run a little bit more right now. All right, 58 total. Time can go ahead and start. Now, on the first overview, they give you no contextualization of the long-term impacts of American presence in the region. We will. Mahoney 19 indicates that for the last, over an analysis of the last 7 years, American presence in the Middle East has reduced conflict on net by over 5%. That's very significant because this is only the long-term analysis of whether or not conflict's more likely to break out if America's there if they're not. That's why you're preferring us. Then you're not voting for them off this argument. There's no contextualization of what these flashpoints look like. If anything, Craig 19 tells you that there's no that you're not going to see any military conflict break out right now due to domestic issues in every Arab state. But now, on the second overview of military solutions, there is no contextualization. You can't put off this one either. They basically read to you two new arguments that don't at all interact with our case, and you can't really vote for them because there's no contextualized impact. If anything, we would say that these states would just turn to other countries that would also pursue militarized endeavors. But if anything, America can still sell arms sales, which means that you'll still see the military motivation of these Arab states. Let's go to our case. On sub A, their first response talks about terror attacks. There's no impact in this round on terror attacks. You're not voting off it. What we're talking about specifically is territorial control. This response has no weight. Therefore, you can group their steel weapons response and group the radicalization response. They have no weight in this round, depending on whether or not ISIS has more or less control. Then look at the survival evidence. That's from 2011, and the issue with this is it doesn't even if they're surviving more, our Heller evidence indicates that American presence in the region has specifically liberated 12 million people and pushed them back to 98% of their territory. Even if you believe that they're surviving more, they're surviving in significantly less numbers and taking control over significantly less people. Then they give two responses. First, small troops can do it, and second, OCOs can do it. Our case preempts that. Cohen tells you that OCOs cannot do it. We need a non-remote presence in the region. But secondly, Monitor tells you that all the troops in the region, all the Iraqi and other troops are untrained, meaning that's why U.S. presence is still vital right now. That means we're still going to win the Heller evidence that says that the most direct way to allow for the resurgence of ISIS and take back a lot of land is to remove coalition forces. That's very significant because just in the first half of the resurgence in 2014, you saw them kill 5,000 people and internally displace 1.2 million. And then on PMFs, you're not voting off this term because Smith, which postdates their evidence in April, tells you that there's currently widespread support to decrease the amount of PMF militias in Iraq because they're killing coalition forces. Then on sub B on Iran, this is going to be a super easy vote. They give you one response at the link level. They tell you that Iran won't invade Iraq. That's not our argument at all. Our argument is that they're going to consolidate political power in Iraq, just like the Erickson evidence gives you the empiric. That's very important because our link evidence from FAF tells you that if Iran consolidates power in Iraq, which because American withdrawal leaves them as the most powerful player in Iraqi politics, you'll see the end of the U.S.-Iraq relation, which means that Trump will treat them as an enemy and sanction them, leading to 217,000 deaths. Their only impact turn on sanctions talks about expelling U.S. troops. No, you still prefer our uniqueness because we preempt that in case by telling you that expelling of troops was actually boycotted by a lot of these Sunnis in the state, which means America still has a welcome presence. Now on to their case. At the top, realize that arms sales are still going to continue. You're still likely going to see a conflict with Saudi Arabia being emboldened again, but secondly, concerned because Rogan 18 tells you that the only road in which Saudi Arabia has good faith in negotiations if they has U.S. presence because it's equivalent to having a proxy war on their border. They need U.S. presence before they're going to let a group with with an opposite that works. Anyway, third response. The board tells you that Iran would capitalize on this moment if Saudi Arabia pulled back. That's very important because their own evidence indicates that Saudi Arabia will only go to the negotiation table if all violence in Yemen stops. That's very significant because he also tells you that the Houthis would likely capitalize on this moment if Iran were to pull back. That's proved by the status quo. They're breaking ceasefires right now. Overall, they're not winning this argument. But then go to Iraq. A couple responses. First, overarching response. Defense 1 tells you that we're reducing military presence in Iraq right now by a little bit. That's very important because he gives you the status quo analysis. A, you are seeing receding terror. You're seeing terror increase right now, which proves our war. But if anything, you still haven't seen a war. You're not seeing any more. That. Don't worry about that response. Let's keep going. Second, their impact already should have triggered. Killing Soleimani should have led to this, but the reason you're never going to see it happen is Horowitz gives you the warrants that Iran does not want to work with the United States because that would likely topple the regime, and the regime wants to stay in power the most. But then go to miscalculation. They say that we're planning an invasion. No, the own evidence indicates that officials likely won't do it because the majority of the defense hawks don't want this to happen. Then they talk about scapegoating. They don't tell you that they proved the bright line of pulling enough troops stops the scapegoating. Then on PMF forces, our Smith evidence on our case disproves that. Then on war, Herzog tells you that neither country, America or Iran, supports war. But secondly, Iran can literally not mobilize troops in the first place, which means you never see conflict break out. But if anything, and U.S. would never attack Iran because that would destroy the regional interests. Overall, either side does not have a way to go to war. If they did, they already would have occurred.
All right. Can I see that the expelling of troops was boycotted? Then I want to see the Rogan turn. Then the did you read a response to our Iran diversion link?
You don't prove a bright line on full withdrawal equaling the end of like scapegoating and diversion.
Okay, yeah.
The Smith card.
Okay, and then the Smith card also.
Yeah. Can you send Smith and I'll grab. Wait. Sorry, I got lost for a second. It was Smith, the Rogan turn, and what was the very first one you wanted to see? Oh, the boycott. All right, I got that.
The boycott.
All right, I sent Smith. The other ones are sending.
Boycott's just been sent.
All right, did you send the Rogan turn?
No,
It's
that's the
sending,
final one.
yeah.
We're working on that one.
Oh, okay, cool.
All right, I just sent Rogan.
All right, I got it. Just give me a sec to pull it up. Okay, we'll start running prep time now. All right, that was 30 seconds. Okay.
You ready for or for second crossfire?
Yeah. Okay, cool.
You can have the first question.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so you read in response to the first overview that like the Mahoney turn, but doesn't Mahoney concede that it increases the intensity of conflict even though it decreases the frequency?
My issue is, what are you trying to get is that a voter for you, this idea about flashpoints?
I mean, I'm just generally saying like the narrative.
Like, just like for the rest of the round, are you going to be extending these overviews, and where are you going to implicate them or weigh them as? Because there's no impact in either of them.
I mean, first of all, we we'll reveal our strategy in our summary speech. But also, my point is just to make that like your response, in case you implicate that response, is like that not true because there's increased intensity of conflict, even if there's decreased frequency.
All right.
Okay,
Sure.
do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, could I have, all right.
Yeah.
So considering that since February, we've been slowly consolidating our troop presence in Iraq, why have Iranian-American escalation, tensions been increasing at the same time that we've been pulling out troops?
We haven't actually been pulling out troops.
Actually, we pulled troops out of 3 different bases in Iraq and have majorly consolidated our forces. That's the Defense One evidence I read in Rebuttal.
They have 5,000 troops, but B, we replaced those troops by moving in missile bases into the region.
We actually, well, not, all right, so you can read down this summary, but, all right, so you're just saying that.
Answering the question.
All right.
Okay.
All right, so you can have a question.
Yeah, okay. So you tell me that the killing of Soleimani means they would have done it, right?
Yeah.
If that was the first miscalculation and the series of miscalculations that has been going on, how is that responsive to our argument that it's getting worse?
Because Iranian-American tensions were strained before the killing of Soleimani, and if anything, killing the top military general of a country who's the second in command to the entire country should definitely cause some more conflict than 2 coalition members dying.
Because when it severed ties with the Iraqi militias, then the Iraqi militias started.
Wait, how did we get to Iraqi militias?
Because it did cause conflict. The Iranian-backed Iraqi militias responded to the killing of their general by launching 16 retaliatory attacks against
How many Americans died?
And well, there were numerous attacks. One of them, 3 American soldiers died. Another one, 2 American soldiers died. Another one, they accidentally shot down a plane.
So my question is, if the military generals and troops are getting killed on both sides, what's the bright line for your argument?
Right. So our argument is very simple. It's not that you just all of a sudden have this one passing the bright line and it comes down to an all-out regional war. Our argument is that it just slowly builds up, eventually it gets worse, specifically because the United States is planning to attack a lot of militias, and militias are planning to attack the U.S. Then these other militias get implicated when the U.S. attacks their allied militias, and then eventually the Iran comes in and defends their militias, and U.S. allies come in and defend the U.S. That's how the war breaks out.
Then why haven't we seen America go in after its own troops were killed? Why have we seen a decrease in amount of troops?
Retaliated. No. Actually, what happened was after that happened, America launched rockets at the Iraqi militia bases, and as of 2 days ago, the U.S. said that they're still intent on fighting Iran and not are willing to go to war.
So just to be clear, missiles are going off on both sides, but we don't know when the bright line gets reached.
No, the bright line will get reached in the status quo. Our argument is it's going to happen.
No, my question is, when can you just give us a month, a month in 2020 when this bright line gets reached, so we can weigh against it, on time frame maybe?
Okay, well, we tell you specifically that within the next 2 months or so, the United States is going to plan an attack on Hezbollah. So that could be your time frame if you want.
All right, that's time.
Okay, we're way over time. Okay. We'll run some prep. Actually, we want to see one more card, just that Iran can't move troops.
Yeah, 1 sec.
Okay.
All right, it's been sent.
All right, we just got it. Start prep. Wait, what's the date on the card?
Oh, it got X'd out. Let me grab that.
Okay.
Yeah, I just sent a screenshot of the article because like the date's like in one part, like off the text. So
Okay, that's okay.
What is
Okay, cool. All right, we'll continue running proud. All right, we used all our prep.
Okay. I'm going to start off on our first contention, our second contention, weigh our second contention, then go to their case. Okay. Is everybody ready? Okay. My time starts now. Starting off in our first contention, they extend 2 turns. The first one is that Saudi Arabia is turning negotiations to the United States. Insofar as the war has lasted for literally 5 years with no resolution, the negotiations aren't working that they talk about. But in addition, remember the Parsi evidence frontline this one. We say that the only way Saudi Arabia actually came to the table and like caused ceasefires and stuff like that was when the U.S. threatened to pull out. Insofar as that is true, the only way to get them to the table is the United States. But then the second turn they say is that the Houthis are ultimately going to respond. The problem is the Houthis capitalized on the province of Jaf just last month, which means the Houthis are satisfied with where they are. They don't want the war to continue. Therefore, the only actor that can stop the war is Saudi Arabia. We extend the second link, which says that negotiations happen only when the U.S. pulls out, which means that millions of lives are saved because ultimately the only way to stop the war is stop emboldening Saudi Arabia. Our second contention, though, is very, very clean. First of all, for the first response they say is that U.S. is reducing military right now in Iraq. The problem is the U.S. still has over 5,000 troops in Iraq and has shown no sign of reducing continuously. And in fact, they increased bases just a couple of days ago. Insofar as it's true, the U.S. is holding firm that they're staying there. But remember what we tell you, that the U.S. already miscalculated with Soleimani. Yes, that didn't lead to conflict, but the point is that it's a tit-for-tat escalation in the status quo, where the U.S. escalated, but they didn't get Iran to back down, so the U.S. wants to further escalate in response to get Iran to continue to try and back down. But then, remember what we tell you, that Iran responded to that escalation by killing U.S. troops and attacking a civilian plane. Therefore, the escalation is happening in the status quo. That means that the trend in the status quo is towards conflict. The only risk of solvency is to affirm the resolution and end that trend. But then, remember what we say, the second link is also really important, because they fundamentally drop our uniqueness. It doesn't matter if Iran is going to die when they go to war with the United States. We tell you it's try or die in the status quo, because the huge economic crisis, Iran has no option but to actually go to this conflict or do nothing. But they view high-level brinkmanship as much more profitable than sitting back and doing nothing. However, we offered a solution on the affirmative world, where we say that Iran would be willing to negotiate if the U.S. was to capitulate and remove military presence, because that shows a sign of de-escalation. Therefore, the only side that prevents the conflict from erupting is the affirmative. But then our third link is also conceded, because remember what we say, that Iraqi militias are gaining more and more strength in Iraq, which means the U.S. is going to miscalculate there anyways, which means we gain access to the conflict. They don't contest the actual conflict happening, which means that we gain access to the 1.5 million people that actually get killed. This is going to outweigh on two fronts. First, it's going to prereq any argument they want on terrorism or their war, because insofar as it kills 1.5 million people, that can start civil unrest in Iraq, but in addition, it's going to cause terrorism to increase no matter what. But also, it's going to increase on magnitude because the 1.5 million people is greater than any number they can read on civil war. But then, let's go to their case. First, on terror. Remember, the response is just that it's about territory. It's about attacks. Attacks will kill people. We tell you attacks increase by 80%. But then, PMF militia is going to be really, really important. Because remember, the only response they extend is this Smith card saying that people don't want PMF militias. First of all, our evidence post-State Smith when we say with the hell evidence that it's polarizing force, which means that U.S. actions are strengthening the power the Iraqi military forces have in the region. This is going to act as a fundamental prerequisite to their own second contention, because PMF militias are the ones that are going to cause a civil war. But if you want to look to their second contention, remember what we tell you, they just say that people don't want the U.S. forces out. They do want the U.S. forces out. Insofar as that is true, U.S. forces are going to get out, and no matter what, the only way to stop the civil war from occurring is to remove U.S. presence right now and not cause any conflict. For these reasons, we are more than proud to affirm. Thank you.
All right. We have 2 minutes left.
Yeah.
All right, you need a charger. But time can go ahead and start now. All right, we have 40 seconds left. Could we see the second piece of the Houthis are satisfied now?
Sorry, yeah. Okay. Same.
All right, we'll let you know when we get it.
We got it. So you can start prep right now. All right. 36 left, and we're going to run that right now. All right. So
All right, I'll go down their case, then go over. Oh, sorry, I'll go down our case, then go down their case.
then read probability on C2.
Okay.
And severity on C1.
Okay. Is everyone ready? Okay, we can start time. Now let's start off at the top of our case. They dropped the two overviews, not going to be evaluating that. But then realize the only responses they extend on our terrorism argument is that one, attacks are going to go up 80%. The problem is there's zero contextualization on what you can vote on attacks going up 80%. The difference is we provide contextualization on what happens if you allow ISIS to resurge. If you allow ISIS to resurge, Heller is super specific in telling you that the only way to combat ISIS and prevent this from happening is a non-remote US presence, meaning US has to be in the region. Additionally, Heller tells you that without US counterterrorism, ISIS will expand both numerically and geographically and cause a lot more conflict. But then on PMF militias, the only thing that they said is that the evidence says that it is super polarizing. It doesn't matter because right now our Smith card, even if it is outdated, looks overall at the intentions of Iran and tells you that they want to reduce the amount of PMF militias in the area. And even so, the amount of PMF militias will increase in their world if you vote for them and allow US to back off, which means that you can buy our impact, which says that the Associated Press tells you if you allow ISIS to resurge and vote for them, in just 6 months, we can see over 5,000 Iraqis displaced and we can see over 1.2 million people killed because of these terror efforts. That's a super clean place to vote. There aren't very many responses from them. But then onto our second sub point, they literally give you one single response to this and almost pretty much concede our link chain. Their only response is that Iraq wants to expel troops, but the problem is they failed to respond to the card that we literally sent them in the email chain, which tells you that Iraq rejected plans to reduce US troops because they want US troops in the area. They're not just going to reject these US troops, meaning this only response on our sub point B doesn't stand, which means you can start Hussein card to tell you that Iran wants you out of the US, wants Iraq as their proxy group, but the problem is Plath tells you that if Iraq is ever Iran's proxy group, the United States will cut off all ties, which leads to our sanctions impact, where Jihad tells you if this happens, the United States will use Iraq as a method to hurt Iran and implement sanctions, which is super problematic because of al-Amari card, which tells you that historically sanctions have killed over 227 million children. That's going to, 227,000 children, which is going to be super bad, the cleanest impact. But then onto their case, let's start at the top. First of all, realize they completely conceded one thing that my partner said in rebuttal, which is that arms sales and stuff like that are still going to exist in the region. So United States presence is still there. But additionally, the only thing they said that war is still going on and negotiations stuff aren't working. First of all, not a reason to vote for them. Second of all, they don't prove that any of these negotiations work. Insofar as the fact that Houthis have literally broken ceasefire right now, that delinks any of their impacts saying that Houthis don't want it. Houthis are breaking ceasefire. They're still continuing to fight right now. Additionally, realize that they're literally never going to reach negotiations and they never prove that a war is ever going to end. Saudi Arabia is never going to negotiate in a world where the Houthis aren't being aggressive. But then onto their second contention, realize that they've just continued to bring up uncarded analysis on our first response saying that the United States is adding bases, but realize the fact that the United States is reducing military presence, which is what we would do, they would do in their world, and the fact that that different tensions and stuff like that is escalating when we're reducing different forces is going to be super bad for them because that just proves that tensions will only escalate in their world. Additionally, let's go into the impacts, the only place that they could possibly get offense. They just say that it's going to outweigh, but the problem is literally no one has any incentive to fight. United States will not risk the oil in the region, and additionally, the more important card is that Iran physically cannot go to war. That is a card in the email chain. We're going to outweigh on probability. It is super improbable that any of this happens. It is more probable that our scenarios happen.
You guys ready for Grand?
Yeah. Okay.
You can have the first question.
All right. So time starts. So you say that these people, or Iran wants to get rid of these Iraqi militias, right?
The Smith evidence says Iraq is decreasing the presence of Iran militias.
Okay, but insofar as the U.S. is increasing them, how does that actually?
Actually, what the evidence, your polarization, your polarization evidence does not at all analyze the current calculus of the leaders in Iraq, unlike what our Smith evidence does. And what the Smith evidence says is because the PMF militias are killing civilians and other things, you're seeing their decrease.
Okay, so I can actually read to you verbatim what our evidence says. It's pretty explicit. It says, further, unilateral U.S. action will only amplify voices in Iraqi politics who argue Americans have to go. Iran's Iraqi allies will consolidate their influence in countries as paramilitaries continue their attacks on forces, to pointing out the U.S. forces to get them out of Iraq.
You talk about also what that card gets you is an amplification of like a sentiment. What our evidence gives you is the current majority support in Iraq. But do you mind if we have a question? The judges can resolve that. The cards are in the email chain. All right, so let's talk about Iran. How can Iran have a war if they are physically incapable of moving their forces?
Do you want to respond?
So our argument is not that Iran physically moves their force in. We've consistently stressed that. Our argument is they use a proxy militia strategy, and that implicates the U.S. and Iran.
I asked this question in first cross, and you said that it would be Iraq fighting. But additionally, you realized the card is super explicit in saying Iran cannot even move forces into Iraq. If it can't go into its neighbor, how is it ever going to actually fight a war with the United States?
And real quick, the only contextualization of your impact, because you guys kind of skirt around this all-out war between two countries in different hemispheres. Wait, real quick, I'll finish. Can I finish? Oh no, the card gives its warranting. They're outdated. But real quick, the only contextualization of your impact scenario, other than being an all-out war, is what you told us in first crossfire, which is that Iran physically moves troops into Iraq.
What's the warranting behind the card then?
Oh, they're outdated and they're simply like you read the evidence itself. It says their conventional military is rusting away.
What does that mean?
It means they can't use it.
Do they have troops?
Wait, this response should have been in the summary speech. Since it wasn't, this D-link is flowed clean.
I don't understand your response. Do they have troops?
Yeah, but they can't. No, they can't move them. They literally don't have the capability.
They literally cannot fight. There's a difference between having numbers and having an army that can fight a war against the United States.
What does they can't move their troops mean? Like
they don't have the equipment or capabilities to move troops into a region and set up camp.
Like, I'm just so confused. Do they not have like
in a military sense? When you say move troops, that just means that move to start fighting.
Yeah.
The only thing your evidence says is that they may be outdated. That doesn't.
No. The
It's
evidence is
super
very
explicit.
explicit, and it's in the email chain right now, and it was conceded in both the speeches you had to respond to. That's time.
Concede.
all right. Echoing. Okay, cool. So the order is going to be our C2, then just down there, case. Is everybody ready? Yeah. Okay, it's cool. So my time starts now. The round is over because our US-Iran war scenario is extremely clean. We gave you intent from all the actors in the region as to why they would want to go to war. The only response they extend is that Iran physically can actually extend two responses. First of all, they say that the US is reducing their military presence right now. We respond to this by saying that even if they decrease their troop presence, they A, still have 5,000 troops in the region, and as long as the troops are in the region, they always feel like there's an imminent threat. B, they just increase their missile bases in the region, which is even further escalation of war. But C, the US is literally planning an attack within the next 2 months if they drop. Clearly, the US is escalating. Don't let them say they aren't. The second response, that Iran physically can't go to war. Their evidence just says they're rusting away. It doesn't mean that they cannot go to war. But even if it's that, it's just specific to troops. Iran can still launch wars in other ways. As long as Iran has the intent to go to war, then they're going to find a way to go to war. But even if you don't buy that, our ghost militias link is really, really clear. We tell you that as long as the US stays in the region, it creates a polarizing force. This can also apply to their response here. This is this is also the Hello evidence, but also the evidence at the bottom of our case. We say that you can't have two actors competing for power in Iraq, because when you have those actors, it creates an extremely depolarizing force, because now there's US siding and now there's Iranian siding. And as a result, there's depolarization, and that is the internal link into sectarianism, which links into their conflicts. So you can vote off of us on their own conflict scenario. But on our conflict scenario, why this matters is because there's these troops that have an incentive to attack the United States because they declare the US as an occupation force. So they are literally planning to attack the United States. This tit for tat escalation is going on in the status quo. The trend is towards miscalculation. and the trend is towards war. The only way to de-escalate the war is if you withdraw our presence and send a signal that we're willing to negotiate. This is clean conceded. They also draw the weighing on this contention versus a prereq, because if there's a US-Iran war, that's going to breed all the terrorism they talk about, which is going to prereq with second on magnitude. Because even if they win sanctions, that they even said 270,000, our impact is 2.5 million people and on severity. But on their sanctions, on their terrorism argument, remember, radicalization means that stopping ISIS causes 3 more groups. That's why we say 80%. But Bowman finds a small presence can still do the job. There's no reason why you have to believe that US needs a big presence to just train allies and give them equipment. Their argument doesn't really make sense. Please don't vote for them.
All right. Their case, our case. Everybody ready? Yeah. All right. On the top of the Iraq contention, extend the uniqueness trends. We read the only card on this topic, which is the Defense One evidence that says the United States is currently pulling troops out of Iraq and consulting right now. They only respond to that with uncarded analysis that we're increasing troops. This is a fact. Prefer the card read in this round 3 different times, but that's very important because that disproves their links. The fact that America is pulling out right now and the escalation they talk about is still occurring means that they don't have any solvency on this. But let's see why they cannot win this argument. They extend their links without dealing with the impact. We give you 2 responses on the impact level that they brush over because they dropped it in the summary speech. The first one is for Herzog, who says that America has no public support to go to war with Iran and realize that it would destroy the region and their American interests like oil in the region. That's conceded terminal defense and is the only analysis of the calculations of the American actor for why it won't escalate. But then let's look at Iran. They drop the Baravesh evidence in summary and simply respond to it with an uncarded analytic in the final focus. But Baravesh is in the email chain. It says Iran is physically incapable of mobilizing their forces even into Iraq and is simply incapable of fighting a war. That's why you don't see their impact materialize. That's why their weighing doesn't work in this round. But let's go to our case. 2 easy places to vote. The first was on terror. They extend the same responses they gave you this entire debate, even though we kept frontlining it. First was on our counter-terror efforts. They simply say attacks increase. There's no weight, there's no impact in this round about attacks. It's only about control. That's why extending Heller evidence says that if you pull out troops, that is the best way to allow ISIS to numerically and geographically increase their control over Iraq, which will displace 1.2 million people. That is a conceded impact. The only other response they say talks about polarization. Look at the evidence in our email chain. We give you these we give you the calculus of the Iraqi parliament right now, and they are trying to decrease pressure. All they say is they're amplifying sentiment. We give you the actual trends of departure. But now the place to vote even after that is on our sub B. They don't mention it in the final focus speech. It's very important. Pafaf says that if we lose troops, that will end the American-Iraq relationship, which is very significant because that will cause America to treat Iraq as an enemy and sanction them. That is 217,000 children dying. That is an argument that is dropped in the rebuttal, practically the summary and the final focus. 217,000 children dying, and sanctions are the largest impact around not only of probability but also of magnitude because they're basically killing people and leading to the impacts we talk about everywhere else in this round. Negate.
Good round.
Good round.
Okay, great. So congratulations to both teams for getting to runoffs. It's a 3-0 decision for the con.
Okay.
Anyone can start.
I can start. So I wrote most of this in my RFD also, but basically I'm gonna evaluate by the voters. So I see first on Iran, I actually gave the pro offense on that because their card specifically says military presence, and I buy that even if troops are decreasing, the bases are increasing, which means Iran will always see the United States as a threat. However, I cannot grant you guys the impact because the con throughout the whole round tells me that Iran and the United States would never go to war because 1, Iran is physically incapable of war, and 2, it does not support the war, and we don't say anything to this in any of the speeches. So I cannot grant you that impact. And then on terror, I did not grant this to the con. I said that although the con has proof that the attacks are increasing, I buy the AF's response of that ISIS will come back no matter what due to the cycle of terror that won't end. Because of that, how I see it is that in both worlds, ISIS is going to resurge because the AF is telling me it's going to anyway because of the cycle of terror, and the neg is telling me that it's going to because of the United States pulling out. So I see this as a wash. So where I vote is on Iraq. So I thought that the second subpoint went completely conceded. The pro never explains why Iran would not take over power of the political power in Iraq, and does not tell me why that would not end US-Iraq relations. It was in second rebuttal, but nothing after that. So for that reason, I allow the sanctions impact, and as that's one of the only impacts I see in the round, I vote for con.
I can go next. I don't disagree with anything that was just said, and obviously I voted con as well. Ultimately, I was compelled by this kind of uniqueness argument, the sense that pulling out wasn't really going to result in any sort of meaningful solvency to the extent that things like arms sales are continuing, the Houthis are already breaking ceasefire, and all the stuff that's been talked about with respect to Iraq. So that was what I ultimately found to be more compelling in making my decision, and that's why I voted for the negative.
I can go. So I voted neg, obviously, and then I said at the end of this round, I'm left with the Iran impact, the terror impact, and the sanctions impact. I don't think that the sanctions impact was addressed during AF summary, so I have to give the impact full weight. And I also agree that the Iran impact is larger than the sanctions impact, but I have to address several things where I can go, or before I can vote for the Iran impact. One, whether or not Iran can even go to war, and two, US pullout is happening the status quo, yet escalation still continues, and three, there's no American support for war, which means the Iran impact is either inevitable or won't happen. So these are all reasons why I already had to address. So I was already kind of probably not going to vote for the Iran impact or not give it the full weight. So I first looked at the Beravesh card, which is actually surprisingly good. And in the article itself, it actually goes on to say how Iran poses an asymmetric threat to the United States, and that the only reason that Iran appeared powerful is because of lack of US and other countries calling them out. And then I looked at the departure card, which wasn't nearly as good because it only describes the departures from a few bases. But then I looked at the card on public support against Iran escalation, which makes it improbable that a full-scale war would occur. So I think that all of these are reasons that are sufficient enough for me to doubt the magnitude of the Iran impact. And if a war occurs, it would be at best a small one. And then I also looked at the terror term by the app. I thought you could better deploy and handle it better because it's arguably more true, I think, than the negs are. But I think the specificity of the Heller card would allow me to grant the neg some likelihood of their specific ISIS terror threat versus the app generic increase in terror attack impact, which also was not quantified out, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you.
Good luck.
Good round. Congrats, both of you.